From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 552. In this episode, Scott talks with Sandi Metz about the art and science of teaching.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm talking with Sandi Metz. She's a software developer and author focused on writing flexible, object-oriented code in Ruby and Rails. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm getting there. I'm between trips right now, and it's getting a little overwhelming.
Nothing nicer than being home, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you between trips as well?
The life I live is always between trips. Yes. The short answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. Because the life you lead is one of being a teacher and putting the knowledge out there.
That's okay. That's a very flattering way for you to put it. But indeed, I teach, I travel, I go to conferences, give talks.
What is an unflattering way to put it?
I don't know. I think I said that because I am really pleased about the idea of being a teacher. And that teaching is something to which we should aspire, right? Mm-hmm. And so being called a teacher is flattering.
Oh, well, you deserve it. And I just decided I was a teacher, so I just took it. People say, "Oh, you're a programmer? Are you a speaker?" I don't like the professional speaker thing. I'm not a professional speaker.
No.
But I realized that if you boil it down, removing it all, I'm a professional amateur and a professional enthusiast and a teacher. The thing with teacher, though, is it implies you have the answers. So maybe I'm a learner.
Oh, my gosh. So, yes. So we don't have, what does it mean to have learned all your life? You've just learned, if you're anything like me, right, the more I know it's trite, but I now just about know enough to understand how little I know.
Yeah, I figured that out last week.
Right? So you're catching up.
Yeah. So are you saying that you are a learner or a teacher or both? Or are they the same thing?
I think the best teachers are learners. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the last 3 or 4 years, I teach a short course in OO. I've been teaching it, I've taught it a number of times. And so I went from being a programmer, making a living by writing code every day, which is so much fun.
To be clear.
To going to people's offices and teaching groups of people how to write code. And what became really clear to me right away is that teaching is a real art, and there's a lot of ways to do it badly. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways I've been learning about teaching, and the students have taught me. Does that make sense? My students have taught me about how to teach them.
Do they know they're doing it, or is it your observations?
No, I talk to them about it. Okay. So I'll give you a little spiel I give them early on the morning of the first day of class, right? What do you think is the best way for people to learn?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you.
Well,
there's research about this. Research.
Yeah, without overanalyzing, I feel like there's seeing stuff, there's hearing stuff, and then there's physically moving stuff around. Right.
Okay. I think those are good. Those are all excellent answers. If I told you that there's a research study, of course, I'm terrible at attribution, so I'd have to go find it. Don't ask me where I got this data, but I didn't make it up. I promise you that. So if I told you that there was a research study where they took 5th grade students and looked at their math scores, and they did a regression analysis about how the teaching styles, and they got to where they could identify the single one thing. They could look at a kid's math score, and for the kids who did well in math, they knew how the teachers taught. They knew there was one specific technique that the math teachers used that caused the kids to have high scores. Can you guess what that is? Feel no pressure.
I do not know.
Okay, and so I've been doing it to you.
Oh, shoot. Asking questions leading me down the primrose path.
Yeah. And I can tell you that when you're, the teacher role is one that has so much status associated with it, that it is really tempting to just natter on to people, just to tell them things. But you know that feeling when you're writing some code, and you're pairing with someone and they have an idea and you don't get it yet? and they try to explain it to you instead of letting you figure it out for yourself. And how annoying it is when you just want to stop and think, and someone keeps trying to tell you. They tell you over and over again. They tell you. And that feeling is so different than the feeling of discovery, that thing that happens in your brain when you figure it out for yourself. Those are like vastly different experiences. That's slightly annoying. Please leave me alone and let me think about this. Go away and let me think. Versus the feeling of that boom, that sudden burst, whatever that happens in your brain, that burst of explosive understanding, how different those are.
The clarity.
If you ask people questions and let them figure stuff out, it's a really different learning experience than telling them things. And so then what I have to do with my classes is I have to tell them, I'm going to only ask you questions. And in order for the questions to work for you, they have to start out like very broad and not helpful.
Yeah. And
then narrow in, and so the questions can make you feel like you're stupid. Because by definition, the first question oughtn't be very helpful.
I'm realizing as I'm thinking about this and because I was just teaching at a conference yesterday, and I was thinking about, I think that I do this, but you're making me realize I'm not doing it that well. I'm asking the harder questions too soon, and then I end up looking at a room full of people staring at me.
Well, here's what I tell them. I tell them, okay, so I'm only going to ask you questions, and I have to ask you the broad, less helpful question first, because someone might get it. Like, you don't want the question to be too leading too soon. But so I just tell them, I'm going to ask you a really broad question, and it's designed to not be very helpful. And when you don't get that, I'm going to narrow the questions down. So I'll ask you a more helpful question, and then a more helpful question, and then a more helpful question. And in the end, like my last question might be a question that it is weird, Scott. Like even a question that tells them the answer. If you say, I might want to send, and they say message for an object-oriented class.
Right.
Having them fill in a blank is really different than saying you might want to send a message. And so I just warn them in advance. I tell them, I'm going to ask you questions. The first questions you hear are not going to be very helpful. It doesn't mean anything about you. They're designed, right? I'll just ask you more and more questions. And if I get to the point where if I am not good enough to phrase a question such that you can figure out what I want you to answer, then I will tell you. But at that point, the next thing I'm going to do is ask you what I should have asked you. And so I tell that to students in the morning of day one. And so I have a really very focused set of increasingly specific leading questions for everything I want the students to learn. And most of those questions have been suggested by past students. And so that's the way in which they've taught me.
Now, how much of this is becoming intuitive and built in and you're doing it without thinking versus how much are you actually having to write down and think about, like, here's how I'm going to take them from point A through B, C, D, Z?
The more I teach, the more familiar I am with the idea that I want to get across, the better I have a stock set of leading questions for a series of ideas that I want to transfer. So I'm pretty good at those. Every class is different and the people have different questions and they want to do different things. And so the further I get from stuff I've taught over and over again, the worse my questions are. But it's just a matter of don't tell them, don't, like I just, for a while, the whole sort of social, the wisdom of the crowds ideas.
Right.
What I find in my classes is that, like very often, let's say I'm trying to get someone to think of something and it's an idea that don't teach a lot. It's just, specific to the course or specific to their code. Very often there's a person in the class who already knows what I'm trying to say, trying to get them to think of. And for me, like I have to keep, their classmates want to tell them the answers. Like some of the worst classes are where there'll be a boss type in there, the CTO will be in there, and they will know the answer to the question, and they want to help. And so very often what I tell all the other students is you can help me teach, but you may only ask questions yourself. And it's enormously hard for people, but if they know, sometimes I can get them to suggest a question to me. What question should we ask that will help them figure it out? Because the whole point is for the people to learn by figuring things out, to solve the problem themselves instead of be told the answer.
Does it differ based on the size of the class? Because as you're describing this, of course, I'm imagining myself kind of walking around in a class, having this conversation and worried that I'm losing somebody and that they're just quiet in the corner and they're being slowly, as everyone else is being brought forward, they're falling farther and farther behind. It's
interesting how it depends on the size of the group is the short answer. For small enough courses, I'm there by myself. I take extra instructors for courses, like every group of 6 people. Well, I start with 12 is just me, but 18 is 2 instructors, 25 is 3 instructors. So there's a lot of help. The other thing is that so the problem of some people being willing to speak up, either to say they know the answer or to ask a question, and other people being less comfortable speaking up in a group like that is a really interesting one. Because as a teacher, like our job, your job, my job, is to get everyone to participate.
Right.
And I taught a course in a workshop, like in one of the Scandinavian countries, where there's a little bit of a cultural difference between the rules about speaking up than there are here in the U.S. And I couldn't get anybody to participate. It was horrible.
Yeah, I always tease the Belgians.
So I took them to them to the bar that night and bought them alcohol and asked them what I should have done. Because they know it's a wisdom of the crowds things, right? Like they understand what we should do. And so they suggested a thing that I do in all my classes now, which was narrow the focus. So let's say there's a group coding exercise and there's 20 people in the room. We just get a token, and the token, it'll be some idiot thing like a stuffed animal. I'll take a stuffed animal, and it'll go to a small group like a pair or a group of 4. And so the rhetorical questions get asked to the class as a whole, but the responsibility for answering gets narrowed to a smaller group. And then the token passes. And it doesn't, depending on the group, it's not always perfect, but what I noticed when I first started doing this is that not only did it make everybody, even the quiet people, it empowered them to participate, but the whole class pays more attention. And the first time I did this,
because you made it a game?
I don't know. I just asked them. I told them I was going to try it. It was in the U.S. I tried it the first time I did it after the people in that quiet, well-behaved Scandinavian country told me to do it. And so I told them I was going to run an experiment, and we tried it. And then afterwards, I asked them, because we'd been doing it without the token, and I asked them, it seemed like you were all more engaged. Everybody, even the people without the token. How did that? What was it? Am I right? First of all, and they said, "Oh yeah, you were right. It was much more interesting." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, we just wanted to know how it would come out." They were just interested.
They wanted to see you fail.
Well, they root for each other. I mean, they were curious.
They were rooting.
Yeah, they were. It made I don't know. I was very surprised. But so anyway,
that is interesting. And this is a thing now. Like this is the way you do things.
I do it in every one of the classes, and it doesn't always work with every group.
Sure.
Partly it's sometimes I fall down. Like it's very tempting as an instructor just to go. Like when I get tired, I let the people who are comfortable talking, do all the talking, because that's the easy route for me.
Doesn't that kind of, I'm thinking, you described a token or a totem, like the conch.
Yeah.
This is kind of like
somebody had a hatchet.
Now you're letting people talk.
Who don't have the token.
Aren't you describing the Lord of the Flies? Like you're instituting a pecking order.
Well, okay. So here's what can happen. Here's a fail as a teacher, right? That we say, I'm going to use a token. We're going to pass it around. The questions are meant for everybody to think about, but the answers that everybody hears can only come from the people with the token. And then there might be other people in the class who cannot stop themselves from calling out answers. And I have to stop them.
Right.
I have to stop that in a nice, pleasant, socially agreeable way, even if they are people who can hardly stop themselves. Right? I have to have that conversation with them in front of the group. It's like, okay, you don't have the token, remember? Tokens come to you next.
Right.
And so there's, all the social issues of managing. It's a weird power thing, right? I don't want to be in charge. I want them to think, but I am absolutely in charge of the social dynamics of the classroom.
Right.
And some classes are easy and some classes require more effort on my part. And when I fail them, it's because I get tired and I quit putting that effort in. I forget almost, right? I start going with the flow.
I want to take a moment here and just thank Pearl Auto for supporting our podcast this week. Now, they make a set of rear view cameras that fit around your license plate, and they sync with your smartphone. Now, you know I like gadgets, but I like useful gadgets even more. Now, my car has an integrated rear view camera, but my wife has a car that was made in the early 2000s that doesn't. She's always wanted to have a rear view backup camera. With Pearl Auto, I can just install that camera frame around the license plate with just a screwdriver, and then I plug in this cool kind of Wi-Fi Bluetooth car adapter into the onboard diagnostic port that all cars have. We mounted her iPhone, the iPhone she carries with her anyway, on her dashboard with a magnet. And then we have the Pearl app that we just download from the App Store. Works with iOS, works with Android. And now she has a backup cam. And it's not just a backup cam, it's 2 high-definition cameras with a fisheye lens that has audio and visual alerts. It warns her of obstacles that are in the way. And she can even see around corners, and it works in day or night. So I really like this idea that you can retrofit any car with a rear view camera, and it's solar powered, so it stays charged on its own. You don't really have to do anything. There was no complicated wiring. I literally plugged this thing in 10 or 15 minutes with my 8-year-old. And, soon rear view cameras will be mandatory on all cars, and being able to retrofit any car and drive safely with it is really great. And it's getting updated, both the firmware and the software, over the air. So I was really impressed, and she's pretty happy now because, we already added Bluetooth audio to her car, and she has now a dashboard mount for her GPS. She's got a car that was made, 15 years ago. She's getting upgrades. And now she's got this rear view backup camera that in full HD, which she's pretty excited about. Now, Pearl Auto has set up a special offer just for you all. Go to pearlauto.com/Hanselman. That's PEARL auto, AUTO.com/Hanselman. You get free 2-day shipping. Big thanks again to Pearl for supporting Hansel Minutes. I feel like people who do not teach regularly, and I've been teaching since 94. And by teaching, I mean, we should be clear also, right? There are tenured professors, professional teachers. I was an adjunct professor at a state school, which is semi-professional.
Totally.
Very
much so.
But then there's also the kind of like corporate training, which we did. Like I did that a lot in the 90s, where it's like, go to Intel and teach them web programming for a week in a room. And you do get it's a little microcosm of, you've all met each other, and then by the end you've bonded. I mean, if you do it right, the whole thing is is quite the adventure. But I think that a lot of people don't realize it really is a dance with 20 or 30 people as you try to get them to gel as a team. And it's all very intense. It's this relationship you have for either X hours or X days. And if you just let it happen, it might work, it might not. But you're describing being a little bit more thoughtful about it, a little bit more planned to make sure that it goes well. You're manipulating the system in the best way.
Yeah. I mean, manipulation is a word I try to avoid using, but it's only because it comes to my mind.
Yeah, I guess it's a good point. I mean, managing. I mean, what's a word that's not manipulating or managing? But I hear what you're saying.
Enabling.
Oh, there you go. Facilitating.
Right, facilitating. I mean, there is a way in which, I show up at a place I've never been, and I get in front of a room of 12 or 18 or 25 people, and I have them for 3 days. And the issues that cause them to bring me there could be that they actually want the thing I purport to do, which is to learn something about object-oriented design. But it's also true that very often I end up doing Well, some form of in-depth therapy for 3 days. You know, they call me because they're unhappy with the code that they're producing, but the reason they're not able to do their best work, to do the work they want to be able to do, may be technical, or it might not be technical. And I would say half the time, maybe not that much, a third of the time, they're sort of social systemic problems that are more important for me to say, hey, there's that whole elephant in the room thing, right? I'll have to say, wow, this doesn't seem to be working. You don't seem to want to pair with one another. You don't have a style guide. Why don't you have a style guide? Your teams don't, right? Like, there's social problems that very often people don't have. They don't feel empowered to talk about them, or maybe they have tried to talk about them and it's caused so much social dissension that they were unable to resolve things, and that gets reflected in the code. And then when I go there, I feel like, they're paying me the big bucks to come in for 3 days. Sometimes we just talk about ways to fix those problems.
I think the fact that you said it out loud, but we were thinking it, is that it may not be technical. That's the problem here. You know what I mean? You're as much a relationship counselor as you are a code professional.
And yes. And part of that, I'm a woman of a certain age. And so I feel comfortable, just saying straight out to people, wow, you guys don't seem to be getting along. Or right? Like, this seems tense. Why is it tense? What is the history of this? I think this is your problem, not code. Unless these problems are resolved, learning more about object-oriented design is not gonna, I don't think it's gonna fix the problem that you have. And I mean, I really do feel it's a serious obligation when they get me in there to be brave enough myself, right, and sort of be. It's that whole thing about being humble enough to be honest in an open-hearted way and try to deal with social problems without making people feel defensive or being accusatory or making the problem worse. Like trying to be, in a generous-hearted way, make it better.
Right.
And
but you also need to ask, you're asking, for lack of a better word, a provocative question. In order to promote or to provoke them to think about something in a way. And it may be provocative questions that they've all been asking themselves privately in the hallway, but no one had the chutzpah to go and ask it. And
it feels like they don't all talk to each other. Like, there'll be cliques, right? There'll be a group that's mad at another group. And the dynamics will play out in the class if they get that, they all get in class together. And then when I see that, I have to say, let's talk about what this problem is. I mean, I've had people cry in my classes. I've taught classes where, in the end, they decided they were going to have mediation. They were going to seek mediation help for the group, which to me felt like a huge success.
It is counseling, though. Like, you found that there is, like, resentment or whatever deep-seated problem within the room. But one question I wanted to back up on, because I think you said something that may or may not be interesting or controversial, which is, you said you're a woman of a certain age, so you feel comfortable, asking these questions. Do you think if you were 19 or a super talented 22 and teaching the exact same class, if you came and asked questions like that, a corporate teaching client would not be as receptive?
I don't know. I think that there's a way in which students, all the students I see who are by and large younger than me, and mostly guys, but I get a fair amount of women in my classes. It skews younger. Well, but they're skewed both ways. I mean, there's if you were to take the 20-year-old hotshot programmer, despite the fact that I arrive in their life as the out-of-town expert, right? I'm generally, I come in with ready-made credentials, but also in a way that I am not threatening to them. And so I can say things to almost any student in my class that they may not accept very well from their peers.
Because you are other? You are not part of the group?
I think that's it, but I'm other like their mother. Like, it's like having your mom or your aunt in there who's known to be an expert in advance.
So I asked before if age matters. Does gender matter?
I think, insofar as, I'm totally making this up, right?
I'm making it up too, right? And this is the great thing about being teacher learner people. Neither one of us has any idea what we're doing.
my sense is that, like, okay, let me back up one thing before I answer that question. I'm going to rewind one bit. I am so genuinely fond of the students, regardless of their age and regardless of their gender. And I like them whether they're easy or hard. I like them whether they have foibles or they don't. The only students that ever sort of make me grumpy are the ones that seem like they're not happy to be there, like which happens in private courses now and then. Like their boss told them to come and they don't want to come. Like those students aren't very interesting to me. But almost everyone else, whether they get it quickly or whether they suffer and try to learn, and so that fondness, I think, is apparent to them. And so that combination, like, I am not challenging them, even though I feel completely not only obligated, but comfortable saying the hard thing. And finding a way to say the hard thing without seeming like a jerk about it can be tough. Right?
Right.
But, there's some way in which I feel like I've been through all those things. I've been through that age in my life where I thought I was the hotshot best programmer around and everybody else was an idiot. Like, I remember that. I remember being that guy, right? And so I look at, if someone comes into my class and they present that way and they're making it tough on their peers, it's a conflict with working with their peers because of their attitude, I feel like, I don't think they're evil. I kind of like them. But I'm happy to tell them, I think that the thing that you're doing is getting in the way is interfering with your ability to work well with your peers. What can you do? How can we resolve this? Right? And so part of it is because I try really, really, really hard not to make people feel picked on. I'm sure I'm not always successful, but it is my goal. And so because of that, what it is, I think now that I've talked around in circles for 5 minutes, I do not want to have the fight. I'm uninterested in the fight. What I want to have is communication. And I express that in every possible way. And it turns out that people who might otherwise be primed to fight if they felt criticized are often grateful for the chance to communicate.
That's well said. I think you're right. So how long are you going to do this for?
I don't know. The travel is wearing, but I love the teaching.
It is wearing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I've always joked about, when I joked, I know for a fact, whenever I'm done where I'm at now, I will teach, but it's a different kind of wearing, you know? I mean, standing up and facilitating like that, being on. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Being on. Like, I was in Atlanta on Monday. I did a talk. I was on for 90 minutes. It was exhausting. I went straight to the airport, went to Minnesota, was on the next morning. And because I wanted to get home to see my kids, the conference was very kind to go and organize the talks such that I gave 3 separate talks on 3 separate topics, back to back. And, in the same room. So I was basically on for 3 straight hours. Yeah. And you know what happened? I had hot flashes or something. I legit overheated. And I know that I was actually breathing while I was presenting, but at the end of it all, I had to sit down. I just went
crash.
I need some water. I just overheated. it was crazy. And it was like the body was telling you, don't do that.
Stop.
It's probably not the smartest thing you've ever done.
Sort of blood sugar thing, right? You can,
Yeah, blood sugar too, yeah.
I mean, think about this. Imagine that it's Shakespeare and you're on stage, right? Imagine you're Romeo and you give that, like there's an audience, and it's this huge amount of emotional and physical energy, and then you do it again the next hour, and then you do it again the next hour. I suspect, I'm going to speak for you for a minute.
Please.
The obligation that you feel when you're giving a talk to a room full of people is huge, right? You're supposed to, it is unfair if you don't give them your all. It is not fair if you add up the hourly rate of all the people sitting in that room, that's what you owe them.
Yes.
And it's a huge amount of energy that you have to give. And then if you do that back to back to back to back to back, when you get on a plane, it's exhausting.
Well, it's interesting that you put it like that, because I am absolutely, even all these years later, I am absolutely conscious and constantly conscious of, I do not want to waste these people's time. Like, there's a lot of people here, and I just pick a number, $50 an hour, whatever, some huge number, because they're all, cool engineer people. And I think to myself, there's actually a website called the Expensive Meeting Calculator.
Yeah, do that for your talk. Oh, that's going to hurt.
I absolutely do that for my talk. If you go to the Expensive Meeting Calculator, like, oh my goodness, that's a $15,000 meeting. These people do not need their time wasted. Yeah. So it's a constant balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so teaching is fun. Talking is fun.
Yeah.
Travel is brutal. Some people seem to like it, but really not me.
Travel's a tough one, because it sounds glamorous the first couple times, but then it's just like the Holiday Inn is the Holiday Inn everywhere in the world.
The inside of that hotel looks the same everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. I'm going to do it as long as I have the stamina to do it, I think.
I think as long as it feeds your spirit and it makes you happy and you feel like it's making you a better person and that you're not doing damage.
Yeah, really. First, do no harm.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, it's interesting. There should be a teacher's, what is the Hippocratic Oath?
Hippocratic Oath for teachers. You betcha. It's probably that. We could probably just borrow that one.
Could totally steal that. That's cool. So, as we kind of wrap up here, where can we point people to learn more about what you care about and what you value?
I have a website that has everything on it. Sandi, S-A-N-D-I, Metz, M-E-T, so it's sandimetz.com.
Okay.
That would be the
And
place.
People can buy your book, and
people can buy books. They can read blog posts, few and far between, but they are there. There's a newsletter that I sent. It's weird, newsletters are. People who sign up for your newsletter seem like they've already agreed to read your thoughts. So I'm generally pretty open on the newsletter, more so than even on stage or in blogs. So that's also a place. But it's all on my website.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
No, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. It's been my treat.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.